Hello and welcome everyone to week 4 of MPA 520. My name is Greg Zarko and this is my week's presentation. So this slide will work as an overview and a quick recap for my scenario. The scenario that I have chosen is an active school shooting. Unfortunately, we just had another one recently. Um, lots of information is still coming out. It's just a very tough incident to have to cover and to read, especially when we're still having to deal with things like this. So I'll do my best to be respectful and to get as accurate as information as I can. So the things that I'll be covering are the different time frames for an active shooter situation. And I have chosen a 3 second, 3 minute, 3 hours, and 3 weeks. They all need different types of leaderships and different aspects of and to deal with the different aspects that are going on for those specific situations. I will also be covering um, the duration of the event, which according to the FBI is 19 minutes, and according to the Department of Homeland Security, it's approximately 10 to 15 minutes. So it just depends where you get your information from. Um, and the commerce that will be impacted, um, studies have shown, and I'll go over them in my lecture, that the school itself is affected. Um, a higher number of absenteeism is usually happens after a school shooting. The school budgets tend to increase by a certain percentage due to school security being increased. The overall school staff, which includes nurses and psychologists, and and the local community and the people that are, and finally the people that would be impacted are the approximately 400 people that are on a school campus at one point. But it's more than just them. As we can see, it's the family members that these children belong to, or the family members who are married, or part of a family dynamic with teachers, with janitors, anybody who's in that school at the moment, and overall the community also gets impacted. So anywhere from 400 people to the community, which could be as big as 100,000 people if it's a town like the one that I currently live in. The first time frame that I chose was a 3 second mark. And at 3 seconds, the crisis is actively happening. We have a shooter on scene. Um, the police may or may not have been called at this point, um, and chaos is running amok in the situation. Confusion is also there, as parts of the school may not know what's happening, or students may be in disbelief. Um, and in the chapter 1, we talked about the major types of leaderships, and I really wanted to focus on specifically on formal and informal leaderships. Um, because at this point, when there's a crisis going on, while we do expect teachers to or adults to be making decisions that could save the students, the reality is the students also have a lot of experience and know the layout of the school. And people are human beings at the end, and so just because someone is an adult or just because someone is a teacher, um, doesn't mean that they're going to act accordingly when a crisis is happening. People get scared, people tend to get frightened. Um, so in a situation, it could be a student who might take that direct approach, who might tell somebody what to do and grab them and put them in a safer situation, get them away from the doors, run towards the back of the building. Um, so really, informal versus formal in a crisis situation at this very moment, I think it's less important. I think it's up to the individual to really take the initiative. Um, and it goes back to our great leaders made or taught, I think a little bit of both. And at 3 seconds, I think anything goes at that point. The article that I found talks about how informal leaderships or leaders can feel dissatisfied or have issues in the work environment because they feel that too much is placed on them, or they're put in awkward situations. Um, Informal leadership at the 3 second mark is what I just said. It could be a student taking charge of the situation with the teacher being involved, and and it could be anything. My wife was pregnant and teaching, so it could be a senior student, it could be a younger teacher. Um, Informal leadership could lead the way here. For chapter 2, I wanted to keep it going as well. Um, we talked about directive styles, and specifically, we I wanted to talk about the directive style. And at this moment, at the 3 second mark, we need an individual to make decisions on the spot, and not everyone can do that. Um, and it's a time for less democracy. It's a time for less uh, poll taking. Someone needs to make a decision, make it fast to their best of their abilities, and not second guess themselves. The article that I found talks about both the good things and the bad things about directive leadership. And for the most part, it talks about the negative effects of directive leadership here. Um, how in the 20th century there's less and less specific individuals who can make decisions for the greater good. How we've gone to more um, group style leadership, but with the exception of a crisis, directive leadership is still the preferred style, at least at this very moment over the 3 second mark. The second time frame that I would like to discuss is the 3 minute mark. So at the 3 minute mark, very likely law enforcement and first responders will be on scene. Um, and at this point, I'll talk about the leadership styles of the law enforcement officers that should be arriving. So in chapter 3, we discuss path goal theory, and I try to figure out how this would apply to um, a sheriff, a sergeant in the police force. And so path goal theory is um, it states that it's the leader's responsibility to align the worker and the organizational goals, right? And so during training, it is important that the cadets or the subordinates of the police officers, the regular law enforcement officers, uh, follow the teachings and the guidance of their leaders. Um, and so that's why I picked path goal theory, because it is up to the trainers to align those goals. Because a policeman's job, especially in a shooter uh, school environment, it's very intense, and you need to those subordinates need to have trust in their leaders. So I tied this up with chapter 4. We talked about the charismatic leadership style, and and during training especially, it's up to the leader to know what kind of subordinates they have. And charismatic leadership goes a long way, because if the leadership uses their charm or charisma, or just their knowledge and getting to know what drives each individual um, police officer, then that creates an a stronger bond, and the ability for the law enforcement officers to want to follow the sergeant, especially in high tense situations. And it builds trust that in a moment where that sergeant might implement autocratic leadership to run into the school where there's an active shooter, those police officers, without thinking, are going to follow the guidance, or actually physically follow that sergeant into the building. In a high tense situation like that, where people's lives are on the line, um, charismatic leadership can go a long way. Um, and the article that I found ties that up. It states that especially for police officers who haven't experienced a situation like this, charismatic leadership is important, because it ties them to trusting their leaders in a non-combat time. Um, so I thought these two were very important in this situation. Path goal theory aligned with charismatic leadership um, in the active shooter situation leading up to the 3 minute mark. Um, at 3 minute mark, still autocratic. You're going in, taking care of business, hopefully ending the situation. The third time frame that I have elected to use for my crisis is the 3-hour mark. So at this point, either if you're using the FBI standard or the Department of Homeland Standard, which determines an active school shooter to be anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to 19 minutes, the 3-hour mark, it is at this point the crisis is the immediate threat is over, but there's still a lot of things that need to happen. There's still the accountability of the people that are in the building or in the situation. There's safety still needs to be provided for those people that may have been injured or worse. That goes to first aid as well. And so for that reason, I in chapter 5 I elected to speak about network leadership, the network leadership theory. And that's because at this point we're talking about multi-agency units coming together, whether it's the paramedics and ambulance, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's different type of law enforcement officers, FBI or sheriffs, depending on the area, uh, and they all need to work together uh, to provide services for these people that are still feeling the effects of the crisis. Um, there may be people that need to speak to counseling right away, or there may need to be people that need to be transported to different hospitals because the local hospital is now overcrowded. So that's the reason why I picked network leadership theory. The article that I chose speaks directly about the impact of that, of having prepared a multi-agency kind of unit, um, and where they come in and they come in, they all report to one incident commander, and once the crisis is controlled, then each department takes care of their portion. The transportation services come in and they transport people out. Emergency personnel know exactly who they go to. Law enforcement officers secure in the area, and they all have their immediate supervisors, but they all uh, respond to the incident commander. So I thought that was a good article to tie into network leadership theory. For chapter 6, I picked the virtuous leader. And the reason why I did that is because the virtuous leader mainly talks about integrity, really ties virtuosity to integrity. And when you're dealing with in a situation like the crisis that I've selected, it's really important to have a leader that you follow who has high integrity, who is honest and trustworthy, and you can expect them to be fair. Um, the article talks about the article that I've selected ties being a responsible leader to being a virtuous leader, and that being a virtuous leader um, allows the leader to make decisions that are best for all the constituents instead of just a few and at the expense of others. So I thought that was a good point to tie into to these two chapters. The incident commander, the overall commander of the situation, needs to be a person of high integrity. My final time frame that I have elected to add to my crisis is the 3-week mark. And I specifically chose this one because at this point we still have angry parents, we still have a hurt community, but the crisis is essentially over. S- Specifically speaking about the active shooter, because we still have to deal with the psychological effect, we still have to address the students who might not be back in school yet, but at least the active shooter is done with. And for strategic leadership, coming out of chapter 7, I felt like at this point it is up to the community leaders, the city council. They're the leaders that would be taking over the reins, and they need to improve their leadership. They need to improve their strategies and how to deal with active shooters. It seems to be a growing problem, or a problem that's not going away, and at least a problem that's not being addressed by the national government. So it's up to the individual states and it's up to the individual communities to really take action if they want to try to limit um, the amount of active shooters in their community. The article that I chose also talks about strong community leadership and how the systems need to be changed and updated with new styles of strategies and a new way to look at things. Um, because whatever they were doing is not working anymore, and the problem has only increased. And we should be looking at as active shooters in that way too. For chapter 8, I decided to talk about the leadership action cycle. And I think that's important because no active shooter situation is the same. And the responses are different, the students are different, the shooters are different, and so what may have worked for one situation may not work for a different situation. And that style of leadership can also be coming from the same person. So in this situation, the city council, they may have thought they addressed or done enough to address an active shooter, and then can still have to deal with another active shooter, and may have to re-up their policies or may have to look at the way they're doing. So the leadership action cycle, at least to me, tells me that you constantly have to be looking at the style of leadership that you're implementing, and you have to be able to adapt to the growing changing community and the growing changing the world that we live in. The article that I chose talks exactly about that. It's about adapting and continuing our way to look at things. That the old ways don't seem to be working. So city council members have to look at what we've done in the past and what worked and what hasn't worked, and continue to grow from there if we want to really tackle the problem that is a school shooting. Okay, so this concludes my presentation for this week. Um, Thank you for listening. I look forward to listening to yours. Please have a good week, and God bless.